So the regulation can do so much, and we need it. And it needs to be really thoughtful, and all of the stakeholders need to be at the table.
Regulation versus deregulation, like the pros and cons of regulation versus deregulation. So in highly deregulated markets, you can move very quickly often, right? And there's less what I would call regulatory capture by the incumbent players in the market, right? Which often happens in highly regulated markets, right? Where the innovation is essentially stifled because the large players lock you out. And in order to be successful or prove you're doing it, it just takes there's too much red tape, right? So you can't get through on the other side. And there's, a safety aspect to regulation, right? And governance, right? To ensure the do no harm piece. But then there's also just an innovation killer in like making too many rules so that people, don't innovate and they can't break through right into the marketplace. So, and I think that affected the Dotcoms, right? And many actually technology companies as they try to grow up. And I think it's why we have very large incumbent players now, and particularly in certain technology spaces that are almost impossible to displace.
Absolutely right. So the dot-com boom and bust, which I see parallels definitely to the boom, and my prediction, and don't need a big fat crystal ball. That bust is coming to a neighborhood near you, which is part of why we need to get ahead of it and maturely address it. The dot-com boom was the result of out of control PEs, no profit, but stock price out of insane, a notion of get in and get out in terms of IPOs and VC capital, very toxic environments that are very well documented. Certainly the FOMO, fear of missing out, everybody wanted to be in. And if you had a dog and you named it .com, you were able to get a couple $1 million and set up a foosball table. And then that folly ended up being a $5 trillion market cap crash. $5 trillion in 2002. So that's quite a bit. That's quite a bit. And at that same time, we also had, it was a zeitgeist going on. We also had Enron and WorldCom. So these are these like the Wild West. The guardrails went out the window in terms of this magical thing. Lay people were becoming enamored with the stock price, with the stock market vis-a-vis these technologies. And as a result of the Enron really is the thing that tipped it over, and then the dot-com bust, something called Sarbanes-Oxley came into place, which it's a very compliance-driven. And I've been in organizations. I've been a senior ethics advisor, looking at how these things play out. It becomes a check-the-box compliance thing, and we see what happened. The bank failure of 27, and then we see what's happening now with AI. So the regulation can do so much, only so much, and we need it. And it needs to be really thoughtful, and all of the stakeholders need to be at the table and really be listened to. The other thing is, if an organization is only relying on, we check the box, it's legal, isn't it? They are not going to survive. I really don't think that they are going to survive. So that's why the values piece of an organization is necessary to complement what the regulation is. Because otherwise it's one hand clapping. Compliance doesn't work.
Yeah, it's interesting. You think a lot of deregulation leads to lots of hype, right? Lots of people developing technology. And then we have a backlash against that often with pretty large scale, I would say thoughtful in the sense that there's best intentions, right, behind the type of regulation that gets put in place. But it tends to just be foisted on everybody kind of legally. And to your point, you then get, a bunch of regulation. I mean, look at the number of people now who continue to run what we would call private companies versus public companies because of just the sheer amount of compliance you would have to go through to be a public company. They say, forget it. It's just not worth it. We're going to keep this whole thing private, and, it creates all sorts of liquidity issues. One of the things we've seen here, I think, in the AI and healthcare market, which I think has been interesting, is there's been a lot of hype around AI and how the promise it could impact in healthcare. But I don't know that we've seen that much implementation yet, like the actual real valuable things. And we talk about, and I know you think about values, right, in terms of the ethical piece. I also kind of get down to what's the core value of like, what what does this technology actually do? Is it saving someone's life? Is it saving money? Is it giving people more time back in the day? Because, if it doesn't do something valuable, right, that has an impact, then it's not really worth anything, and we shouldn't be spending any time on it, which is different than the hype cycle. Right. So how should we think about, like, when you talk about values and companies being around, I just think, the word value can mean lots of things. How do you view that
You
perspective?
can, yeah. So the value piece is when an organization, and this is, I'm walking you through my model now. And this is, I developed I haven't named it yet. I want to call it sturdy leadership, but I'm not sure because that's actually what it is. We talked about this a little bit. We are in what's called a VUCA environment:
Hmm.
volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And this was developed by the Army War College after in the 80s, after the Berlin Wall fell, because there was a white hat, the U.S. and our allies, and black hat, Soviet Union, and that all went out the window when the wall fell. And we have, insurgent combatants that don't have a flag. So does the Geneva Convention apply to them? Just and a million different doctrine types of questions to be asked. And that term VUCA was coined. And then it really started getting into the leadership literature. And now in the AI literature, I'm talking tens of thousands of peer-reviewed articles,
Hmm.
not tens of, like almost 20,000 in the past couple of years, incorporating VUCA into leadership models and AI and bioethics, by the way. And so it's really becoming part of the parlance because there's no better way to describe the arena that we are in. I've added chaos as another C. So volatile, uncertain, complex, chaotic, and ambiguous. And if you talk to anybody who has a pulse or their company has a pulse and wants to live another day, they acknowledge that that's the environment that they're in.
Hmm.
So given that they're in that environment, they have to change. Second leg of the stool is that change management initiatives, which I think AI is first a change management initiative and second, a technology play. Because when's the last time you got all excited about .com? That you even heard any hype around it? It's gone. We don't talk about it. I say by 2030, we are not going to be talking about AI. We're going to be talking about AI's grandson. It's going to be gone. So we are repeating this, getting into the froth. By the way, 70% of change management initiatives fail. This is per McKinsey, who's involved in a very high percentage of significant change management initiatives. And they fail for the following reasons. The same reason there was a .com failure. Management doesn't walk the talk. There's not enough resources. There's so much change that employees have change fatigue and they won't do it. And there's a lot of this. They're doing this and saying, no way am I doing that. The
Hmm.
same thing's happening now when people don't have a voice. So there are organizations that are either developing, deploying, or implementing AI. And there are people in those organizations who are thinking, this isn't going to work. And they are unable, they don't have the competency to speak up. Now, this goes back to values, the reason why I gave all of that. The anchoring keystone for organizations is to understand what their values are and to do it in, I call it a bespoke manner. The values that are going to work for xCures is not going to work for Pfizer.
Hmm.
They're different. You have different missions. So your values democratized, meaning that everyone in your organization, and you can use AI for this, has an input on what is most valuable to them as a person. Because when you have that moment when you are to speak up, you want to speak up because you know it's wrong, but you are afraid to because of the consequences. And we're going to talk about xCures in a bit because I want you to share what you shared with me. If people either are afraid to speak up because they will lose their job or be marginalized, or they think that the pain of speaking up will be greater than not speaking up, we have to change that equation and create an environment in which people can embody their values. You democratize them, and that's what gets socialized as our values. So when or somebody within an organization It says, you know what we're working on now really isn't patient-centered. We are focused on the balance sheet right now to the exclusion of patients. So to have a conversation about it, how do you normalize that conversation around values and give people the competency to speak up? It is the most required thing. Oh, speak up when you say something, and the least skilled. So that goes with the values. So those are how those things tie together. You have your identified values. You teach people actually how to speak up, and you operationalize those values by using things like implementation science. Why in God's name do we look at values or ethics as something that's other than, and it's a once a year event when you sign the code of conduct? So these need to be embedded so that the values become alive.